Hello, retro fans. Every now and then you come across something in the, let's call it retro world, that on the first glance sounds a bit crazy. It sounds a bit overpriced, and it sounds like something you probably don't need. Well, I mean, the whole topic about retro and hobbies and all that stuff is perhaps something you do not need at all. But anyway, we're talking about hobbies and interesting things. So there's probably no discussion whether we need something or not. But anyway, coming back to my first sentence or sentences. And you think, well, that's really something I do not have to add to my collection of already very, very large things in terms of retro computing and so on. But well, but after a while, you start thinking, and then it starts to kind of nag you a little bit. So you can't get it out of your head anymore. And that was actually the very same for me when I heard the first time about the Analogue Pocket. And I thought, well, who's gonna need a Game Boy like this? And yep, I spent some time thinking about, and I, well, spent so much time thinking about that I was unable to order one from the first batches. And after a while, it just came out of focus, and I had other things in mind. But last year in December, I've seen the announcement that there is a new pre-order for a new batch of Analogue Pockets. And since I came back to Game Boy gaming over the last 2 years, I thought maybe that is something I might need. To put it like this, I have ordered back then, and eventually, after moving the shipment date 2 or 3 times, 2 weeks ago, I have received the Analogue Pocket, and this is actually my first impression about the current state of the device, what has changed since then, whether it makes sense to buy something like this, and what it is actually capable of, and whether I like it or not. So we will see. And here we go. I thought my automatic scene switcher was kicking in, but probably this was maybe a victim of some of the most recent updates. So I have to admit, I'm actually happy that my OBS, loop deck, whatsoever setup is working again. I had a lot of troubles over the past weeks due to updates, due to some missing connections and changes in scenes and sources and everything like this. So I spent in total at least, I think, 10 to 12 hours to get everything back into order. And now actually it is working again, but it's not about OBS, it is about the Analogue Pocket. So let's have a look indeed at the desk as usual. And as you can see here, it is already in its full beauty and glory, whatsoever you want to call this. And indeed, this is a bit zoomed, so this device is not as huge as it appears right now, but it is indeed huge. We will see some comparison later on. And yeah, as you can see, I went for the black one because the white one was looking a bit too Apple-ish, I have to say. And since I'm not a profound fan of Apple products, I have no problems with Apple products. So, and it's everything fine in this world that things like this exists. But as a matter of personal taste, I'm not a big fan of it. So anyway, I went for the black version and I haven't regretted it yet so far. I think it looks pretty beautiful, and we will see that there is one major advance compared to the white version. And yeah, but not going to jump ahead. Let's stick to what we are talking here right now. And yeah, I told you it is huge. It is not as huge as it appears. So in comparison with my hands, it is still a handheld device. And I have zoomed in so much because I want to present some of the fantastic features of this display. But to put this into perspective, maybe, this is actually the Game Boy Pocket. So it's not the original Game Boy. As far as I remember, the original Game Boy might be as huge as the Analogue Pocket, but the main difference is what you can see here right now is the display size. So the original Game Boy had, and as well as the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Pocket, they all have the same display dimension. And that was actually one of the reasons why I really started to consider getting the Analogue Pocket, because of the display size. So I'm close to my 50s now, and I have to admit that I started to feel that I'm getting older. So probably 20 years ago, a display like this wasn't really a problem. So I was really able to play games on this display, even with, let's say, this some sort of dull contrast. Let's just add a game to it so that we can see what I'm actually talking about. Let's pick one that looks nice and dandy. Now, sorted my whole collection. I can't find it anymore. Let's go for the classic. Yep. Oh, there's already one inside, so could have been much easier than this. And yep, indeed, it is Castellian. You may have seen my recent video about this, and that's actually a game I'm well playing sort of a lot quite recently. And yeah, here you can see that the display is indeed not very strong in contrast. I mean, you can adjust the contrast a bit, but with all these side effects we all are known, we all know about, and actually that's the main difference between those two devices. And the original Game Boy Pocket has no backlight. I still have this in mind. It's on my list of things I might do sometimes, that I am going to change the display in the Pocket to a backlight display with a bit better contrast and all that things. Because the Game Boy Pocket, I think, is still unbeatable in terms of size, in terms of, let's say, transportability. So throwing this into your pocket, it's actually something you probably won't recognize at all, because it's very lightweighted, and it has just 2 AAA batteries, so it's really very light as well. And I really love the size. I really have no issues with finger placement and all that stuff. So this is actually my most used Game Boy at all. And let's just mute this a bit. And talking about Game Boys, this is in comparison the Game Boy Advanced as the flip version, or whatever we want to call this. And here you can see it is size-wise almost the same. And the display is, interestingly, I haven't recognized this before. The display is actually as wide as the Pocket. So you can see it here in comparison. So the display is almost the same width as the the Analogue Pocket. It's a little bit wider, talking about the Analog, but the height is indeed different, and that's actually one of the main complaints I have seen about. Interestingly, I was expecting that this game is actually going to start, but this white screen is pretty nice for comparison. Are we running out of juice? That might be a problem. There we go. So might be just some dirty contact. And now we got a game. Yes. So, and as I was actually started to say, this is one of the main complaints I have seen for the Analogue Pocket is the difference in the display ratio. And I have seen a couple of people complaining about this letterbox format, which is actually used on the Pocket for, let's say, Analog or for Game Boy Advanced games. So let's just throw one in and have a look at how it's going to look like. And here we can see it. So there's a black bar on top and below the main picture. But as we can see, it is still a bit wider than the original Advanced. And therefore it is indeed a bit sorry for this one. That was indeed unexpected. So the total usable display size is still bigger than the original Game Boy Advanced. So therefore I cannot complain at all, because I got a device with a bigger display compared to standard Game Boy as well as to the Game Boy Advanced. And the black bar or black bars below and on top of the picture is something that might disturb you on the white version of the Analogue Pocket. And this is what I've mentioned at the beginning. The black version here has a clear advance in my opinion, because you're not going to recognize the black bar anyway during gameplay. And as mentioned already, since you get a bigger picture compared to the Advanced. What? No, nothing to complain. So it's my opinion. I mean, everybody might see this a little bit different, and it's fine. Therefore, I'm not going to blame someone for his opinion. And yep, indeed. In terms of display, the Game Boy Advanced with the so-called, where is it mentioned? AGS 101 display. Yep. Is probably the best display you can get on a standard Game Boy Advance, something like this. And in terms of Game Boy games, it is much better than what I have seen on the Game Boy Color, which is actually unfortunately not working because I have disassembled it a couple of years ago and I missed some parts, so really have to get this one back to life. And compared to the Game Boy Pocket, indeed, it is much better. You have this issue with the size. I mean, it is wider than the standard Game Boy display, and it is a little bit smaller than a standard Game Boy display. That's really something that surprises a little bit. And on the Game Boy Advance, you have the black bars on the left and on the right screen. So there's something that isn't really doable with a display that has to show different display ratios. And since the Analogue Pocket is mainly designed to run Game Boy games and Game Boy Color games, I have to say I'm really happy with the way they have implemented this. And just to move a bit forward, if we just get rid of this one, and maybe we go for Castellan, as we have seen it already. So unfortunately, it isn't as visible as I was hoping for. How can we change that? Let me see if we can. Okay, probably getting closer. So now we have some sort of a small more grid on the video capture. I can tell you it is absolutely clear, and the reason for this is that the Analogue Pocket comes with a couple of different display modes, and we can switch through them by just pressing, holding the analog key and using the left-right button. And the native resolution of the Analogue Pocket display is actually 10 times the original resolution of the Game Boy, and therefore they can use some fancy screen effects to recreate the original feeling of the Game Boy. And this is something I really love, I have to say. That's something that's actually blowing me away. It's so cool, it looks so great, and it adds so much authentication to the gameplay that it is really something worth mentioning. And I think that's actually the main reason for going for the Analogue Pocket if you are looking for a portable device. I mean, if you're familiar with the Mister project, whatsoever we want to call this, then you know they have the so-called screen filters, CRT filters, whatsoever. And this is really amazing how games look like if you apply this screen filters or the CRT filters. They have a couple of presets for well-known monitors and TVs, and that's really something that could be a reason to get a Mister. But since I have so many original devices, it's probably not really something I'm going to go for. But anyway, we're talking about the Analogue. And this screen effect can be applied to monochrome games, as we are seeing here. This can be applied to those combined games. This is actually cartridge, the black cartridge, Game Boy cartridge. They can run on the old black and white devices as well as on color devices. And then we have this color only cartridges. They look like this, and they all look amazing. So that's really something that makes this device so enjoyable. Unfortunately, my camera is really not able to capture this in this full beauty. So that's something maybe that's visible on the 4K video, but unfortunately I do not have a 4K camera for this. Anyway, and here we have the same options. We can switch to this analog GBC screen or to the original GBC LCD. And we have indeed a lot of settings. So if we go into the systems, we have video, then we can adjust a couple of things here. And we can even say if we want to run this as a GBA, because this may add additional features to Game Boy Color games has been designed with the GBA in mind. I think one of the Zelda games is using this, and probably one of the Mario Brothers something games. I'm not that much into those games, so therefore I can tell. And you can configure all that stuff per system. So that's actually the Game Gear. For this, we require an adapter, which I do not have, and I do not have any Game Gear cartridges anyway. So that's nothing I care about that much. And I really have to say the colors, they really look amazing. It's so nice. You can adjust the brightness of your screen as well. So you can crank this up to max, or you can dim this a bit if it is much darker. So my desk is pretty bright in light, so therefore it is actually a bit hard to see, but it is really bright. So there are no issues even in daylight conditions. That's absolutely fine. Yep, so what else? I mean, the form, it is, as I have said, a huge device. And compared to the Game Boy Advanced in this SP format, not in this duck bone-like shape, it is indeed a bigger device. And especially if we talk about Game Boy Advanced games that utilize the shoulder buttons, some people complain about the ergonomics of the Analogue Pocket. And I can partly understand this, but I think this comes really down to the way you hold the device. So I have seen videos where people really have the device like this, and they have to bend the thumbs quite a lot. And this is actually not like I'm holding it. I have it more like in the middle of my hands. My index fingers stretched out, and then I have enough room to operate the buttons without bending my thumbs too much. And this is very comparable to the way I hold the NES controller, for example. They are just a bit wider, but anyway. That's more or less the same. And therefore, I do not have any issues with the shoulder buttons. Because as we can see here right now, I can't turn my hands all the way around, so I hope you don't mind. If we have insert a cartridge, then you cannot reach with your fingers to the inside or to the middle of the device and pressing the button at the same time. So this is going to be pretty hard, but I cannot imagine to play games like this anyway. So as I said, my fingers are more placed like this, and I have absolutely no problems using those buttons. I have played Metal Slug for quite a while, and it is actually utilizing those shoulder buttons quite a lot. And well, as I said, I have no problems. I'm absolutely fine with this. And the next advantage is that it places the display a bit higher. So in terms of looking at it, I do not have to duck my head that much. So it's even if it's just a few centimeters, but I think this is quite comfortable. And if you talk about Game Boy Advanced games, which are using actually just this part of the screen, it is quite fine as well. So we have indeed a couple of more features when we are playing original cartridges. So the very first thing that I highly appreciate is actually the so-called memories. So, I mean, this quote alone, to people who know this, they may share my opinion, but this quote alone really is worth all that hassle getting this device. And I have to smile every single time I'm seeing this. And I'm not going to give it away. So if you know this, it is from a famous movie, but I'm not going to say from which one. Anyway, and this is so-called memories, and we have save states and we have screenshots. And save states are really cool because you can save any point in game. And I have used this indeed to train drop zone at the higher levels, and so I there was no need to go through all the levels if you want to play wave 10 or something like this, and therefore I was able to use this as some sort of a trainer. And the next cool thing is, and if we're going to load maybe the last one, and wait a second, we can actually use this to save the high score tables. So many of those old games are not able to save high score tables. And I have some older games where I have used very simple approach. Now we can see it is filled with my name. And back in the good old days, I have used post-its, and I wrote the high score I made and the level on back on of the cartridge. This is Mrs. Pac-Man, for example. It has two modes. It has zoom mode, where the labyrinth is actually scrolling, and it has this full mode where you can see the whole labyrinth, which is indeed much more playable on the Pocket, Analogue Pocket, as on the original devices, because it was simply too small a bit. So I have divided this into different sections. And the next thing I have used as well is, not sure that I have a cartridge here. There's another one with, indeed, yes. So this is one of my most loved games as well. And I wrote down the level codes on back of the cartridge so that I can start from this point. And this is actually the very same thing where I use save states. And just since we are here, the save states are saved on the SD card, and you can indeed insert this into your laptop, computer, whatsoever, tablet, and you can edit those files, you can sort them, you can rename them, you can delete them. And as you can see, they are not bound to a specific cartridge. I mean, indeed, if you're going to load a game state that's meant for a different cartridge, then it isn't working at all. But you have a list, an extensive list of those game states. And every now and then I just make some clearing, get rid of all the ones. And some I have used for testing, for example. And this is actually how I use game states for this game. So every 5 levels you get a level code, and I simply make a game state at this point so that the game remains enjoyable, because if you do a save state for every level, then there's actually no challenge at all. So just to put it this way. And another way would be to use screenshots, for example. Here you can save a lot of screenshots, and I have used this for other games. So these are screenshots from this game, for example. They look pretty small because this is just some sort of preview, and we can delete them, what we are not going to do. But I haven't found a way to zoom them. So it would be nice to have a full screen option. And nope, there are no buttons doing this for us. No, okay. But as I was going to say, you can use the screenshot function to make screenshots of the level codes as well. So you can come back to it later and start playing the game from this point on. If and that's something I have to add, if you are using cores that aren't utilizing the save state feature right now. So I have revealed a little bit what I'm going to talk about next, but that's actually some sort of workaround if you have a game or a core that isn't working with save states. Then I do a screenshot and then I can come back to it and I can simply see what was the game code, and then I enter it and I can continue the game from this point on. So no more post-its required, and everything is much easier now. So this is actually from the Amiga version, for example. So, and yep, that's so much about save states and screenshots. As I have mentioned, not everything is supporting save states, but everything that comes from Analog originally, so playing Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, or Game Boy Advanced games, save states are fully supported. That's actually not an issue. And the next topic I have already mentioned in a bit is the so-called cores. And this is actually placed behind the so-called open FPGA. So with the most recent firmware and probably one version before this one, I don't know, the concept of open FPGA has been implemented. Technical wise, the Analogue Pocket consists of two FPGAs, so field programmable gate arrays. These are some sort of logic ICs that can be programmed on the fly. And this is actually the main difference compared to an emulator. The system is really some sort of rebuild inside this FPGA. So all those logic arrays, all those flip-flops and ANDs and NORs and whatever we find in a standard IC nowadays is actually recreated inside this FPGA. And therefore it mimics the original hardware as good as the core has been created, so to say. And this provides cycle exact recreation of the original systems. So just to put some sort of an example here, if we do this in code, if we program an emulator, we have, leaving multi-core systems aside, but if we just talk about a single core, single thread CPU, we have one instruction at a time. And this is a very, very huge simplification of how a CPU works, but I hope you don't mind. This is just to provide you an example. So an emulator is actually going through the instruction one by one. And if we have to update the graphics, and if we have to play some sound, and if we have to operate some other parts of our hardware, if we have to read some player input, something like this, this can't be done in parallel. So this has to be step by step. And therefore, it is very, very complicated, or maybe it's not so easy as it sounds, to create a cycle exact emulator, because you have to sort of buffer certain events so that you can kind of operate at the same time those events. And on an FPGA, you just recreate your components, the CPU, your RAM, your video chip, your sound chip, all those things that are included in a retro whatever system, and they can work in parallel. So actually that's not causing any issues. There indeed are some limitations, is actually the size of the FPGA. The more complex the system, the bigger a system becomes, the bigger the FPGA needs to be. And this is actually a cost factor. This makes those systems quite expensive. And The next thing is indeed power consumption. The bigger the FPGA, the more power it needs. And the Analogue Pocket, if we talk about energy consumption, has I think 4,800 milliampere hours battery inside, which is good for, let's say, 6 to 8 hours of Game Boy gaming. But if we talk about cores that are mimicking more complex systems, then you can feel the drain of power in your hand because the Analogue Pocket becomes warm. And I'm not just talking about warm by measuring it. Now you can really feel it. And just to give you a brief overview of what's actually possible. So indeed, we have the handheld section. You can sort this course. I'm going to show you this in a minute. And here we have the Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, and Game Boy Color. These are maybe not exactly, but these are cores coming from the Mister project, I think, sort of. So I haven't checked all of the cores where they are coming from, but to put things a little bit, or to describe things a little bit simple, there's a whole universe of people creating cores for different systems. And the most famous system is indeed the Mister FPGA project so far. And many cores are ported from there to the Analogue Pocket. And therefore we have here cores which are really close to what the analog device has to offer by itself. But here we are actually lacking some features like save states, for example. But we have the comfort of placing our ROM files on the SD cartridge. So I do not have to travel with my stacks or boxes of Game Boy games. So I really can put some of my most played games on the Analogue Pocket, and then I can play them whenever I feel I want them to play. And if we are going to test this, the Game Boy core is able to make save states, but I think the other ones weren't. So if we go handheld, Game Boy Advance, I think I do not have any games on it right now. Nope. And the Game Boy Color. Oh, it is supported here as well. Okay, so it looks like the Game Boy cores are able to use save states, but they do not have this nice display features I have sort of presented a couple of minutes ago. You have a very simple scaled screen, which is no problem since the screen is actually 10 times the original resolution, so there are no scaling artifacts or something like this. But it is a pure plain right in your face. No screen filters, shaders, something like this. And compared to the analog display settings, I have to say I really prefer playing the original cartridges as often as I have them on hand. I just use those cores to play either games I do not have with me, or if I just want to test something, whether I want to buy an original cartridge or not. And yeah, so much about this. And we have seen here arcade systems, and the most amazing thing, and I really haven't expected this, and talking about expectations, when I was ordering the Analogue Pocket, they have mentioned the idea of using other cores. But at the point in time, last year in December, it was for me just a Game Boy, a better Game Boy. And over the last year, they have improved so many things, and they have implemented this open FPGA concept. And when I was checking the list of cores supported by the Analogue Pocket and I saw Neo Geo, I thought, okay, it's going to be the Neo Geo Pocket. And if you're familiar with Neo Geo Pocket games, they are cute. It's really nice that they exist, but if you know the Neo Geo Arcade, the MVS or the AES, then the Neo Geo Pocket is not really something you really want. But then I learned, nope, it is indeed the real Neo Geo. And it is required to have a certain ROM collection. And due to copyright issues, I'm not going to post any links and I'm not going to mention the name of this Neo Geo ROM collection. But actually, it is really required that you have one specific because the core relies on a certain directory structure, a certain file name, conventions, all that stuff. And I have tested other collections as well, other ROMs, and I couldn't get them to work until I found this specific one. And this is actually working. As you can see, it takes quite a while to load the ROM files into the core because, I mean, you probably know that Neo Geo is famous for huge cartridges in terms of capacity. So they were really advertising this at the time. And if you go for, let's say, the most recent games, which is a little bit strange to say, but anyway, you know what I mean, then indeed it takes quite a while until they are fully loaded into the system, but then everything is working fine. And I have tested a couple of them, and the nice thing which I really enjoy is that now I'm able to play so-called homebrew creations, and I have even bought some on itch.io, for example, but I had really a lot of issues with emulators, and I wasn't really enjoying this on my PC system, and therefore I haven't spent that much time. And unfortunately, the Neo Geo Minis are not officially upgradable, so you cannot upload any new ROMs to them. So you really have to stick with what you got. And therefore, I was really missing a couple of games, and especially the newer ones like Neo Tris and Hybridroid, just to mention those two. They are looking really amazing, and it's really nice to have the chance to play this stuff on the Analogue Pocket. Screen-wise, well, we are reaching a limit. So even if the screen is bigger than compared to the Game Boy Advanced, and if you talk about, for example, Metal Slug, yep, then it is indeed a bit more playable compared to the Game Boy Advanced. But if you talk about full screen gaming, then, well, it is indeed a different world. And if you talk about shooters like Blazing Star or Pulse Star, something like this, then things become a bit hard to see, hard to recognize. And it's really tricky to dodge all those bullets and energy balls, whatever is throwing at you. Therefore, it is indeed a bit, well, a challenge. Let's put it like this. So, but anyway, let's quit this core and see what we have next. I really have to mention I have installed just a fraction of all the available cores right now because I was just interested in a couple of things, and I have mentioned the Amiga core already, and this is indeed very interesting. I just have to load the right BIOS. And then we can indeed load an Amiga game, and the Analogue Pocket is able to mimic an Amiga 500 in its standard configuration up to full-blown Amiga 1200 with additional RAM and turbo and all that things. So that's really mind-blowing just to have this in your hand. And as mentioned before, this is actually pushing the Analogue Pocket to its limit. It really gets hot in your hand. It is really eating through the battery. So I recommend playing Amiga games at this configuration with the USB-C power connection connected. And probably that may cause some heat issues when we talk about summer times or something like this. I have no idea, but this is really something that I think is the upper limit of what the hardware is capable of. But I was really blown away to see this Turrican 2 AGA version running on the Analogue Pocket. So, and thanks to my friend who helped me configure this. And that's really impressive. So let's get out of this. And see what we have next. And indeed, you know that I'm a bit into the Atari systems and I'm a fan of the NES. I'm not that much a fan of the SNES, but I had some troubles getting Pushover on the Amiga to work. So I went for the SNES version of Pushover, and this works actually quite fine. And the NES, well, I mean, the Game Boy Advance is already able to play NES games with some limitations, but this is therefore not really a challenge. There are some weird multi cartridges available, like this one, 369 in one. This cartridge consists of a lot of NES and NES modded ROMs. And the next one is actually this one. That's the Sega Master System collection. And for Game Boy Advance, those games are looking quite impressive, but in terms of playability, not really. Anyway, so SNES, and indeed my absolute favorite, the NES. And here I have just a little collection of games I tend to play on when I'm on my way to on vacation, something like this. And it's really nice to test games that coming from new publishers, new creators, homebrew games, demos, all that stuff. And here it is very interesting because I have another mobile NES system, or probably that's actually a Famicom system, and that's this one. And here it is quite clear if we compare the display size. I'm not that much enjoying playing Famicom games on this device. Fortunately, it has a video out, and if I'm on business travel or something like this, I usually have this in my pocket, including the video cable, and I can attach this to hotel TVs, for example, and then I can play some NES games on the hotel TV. But now with the Analogue Pocket, it is indeed possible to play NES games on this screen as well. So that's not going to be the best performance I'm going to show here right now, but just want to give you an impression what is possible with the Analogue Pocket. And indeed, this is very, very enjoyable. So much about the NES core, and I think it supports games, save states as well. So you can use this for practicing games, for example, and to store your game progress for games that aren't offering any battery buffered game states or something like this. And yep, so much about cores. How to get those stuff onto the Analogue Mini, Analogue Pocket. Confusing names. Well, it is actually quite simple. As I have said before, you can use the SD card in your PC, laptop, whatsoever, and copy all that stuff to it. And then you can go and start them right on here. And I have found that I have used the Pocket quite a lot during the last days, during the last 2 weeks, so to say, since I have received this. And I had to charge it a lot as well. And I really dislike things lying on my desk with a cable attached. And I really have for most of my smartphones, and I have created a stand for the Game Boy Advance as well. I really like to place them in some sort of upright position. So I created a little 3D printed stand for the Pocket. And as you can see, I have implemented a USB-C cable into this one. So I can simply just put this into this stand, and then it goes automatically into charge as well as into USB mode. And since this looks a little bit like Stanley Kubrick's thingy at the beginning of Odyssey, what was the title? Odyssey in Space, I think. And I thought I need some sort of a tilted stand. I have created a second piece, just actually some sort of an adapter. And I can simply place this into this adapter. And now I have a very nice Analogue Pocket stand. You can order a dock, it is called. Not a dog that is barking, it's a dog with a CK. A little bit hard to pronounce, maybe. From Analogue as well, which acts some sort of an USB-C to HDMI adapter as well. So then you can connect the Analogue Pocket to your TV set or your capture software whatsoever. And you have 2 USB ports to connect game controllers to it. I might consider doing this because with the increasing quality and amount of cores which are meant for home TVs or arcade systems, it is indeed interesting to use this as a home console as well. So, and as far I went through a couple of different forums and web pages and so on. Nobody was able to convert the USB-C to HDMI without the original analog dock. So most of those, or all of those available USB-C to HDMI adapters aren't working. So they have implemented something unique, to put it like this. And therefore, I really think about this. The issue is that the dock itself costs $100 plus shipping, plus custom fees and all that things. I will probably end up somewhere around $130, $140/euros, depending on the exchange rates. So. And this is indeed a huge amount for just something to place your handheld into it. So I really have to think about this a bit. But as I said, using this device as a home console sounds indeed interesting. So I will really pay attention to this, and especially what controllers are actually working with this dock. That's pretty important. And yeah, so that's probably something I will go for. I will make this stand available on printables as usual. I'm actually working on an updated version because what I haven't had in mind when I was creating this one is the audio output. We can connect a 3.5 millimeter audio jack to this one, and then we can listen to music, for example. So if we go for the Amiga, for example, and okay, I just have to fix this with my BIOS file here. Load. Let's go for a Turrican. Yep, that was good. Then let's see. Hopefully you're not going to get blown by the volume now. Has some considerable loading times. So they may implement hard disk features as well in the future. So, oh, I haven't added the audio source. That's interesting. Why is it missing? That actually is fixable. At least I thought so. Ah. There we go. Now we got full stereo sound. Talking about sound. Yeah, I almost forgot about talk about this. The Analogue Pocket comes with stereo speakers, left and right indeed. And most of the times it sounds fantastic. So playing Game Boy games, playing most of the NES games, everything is actually fine. Except for games coming, for example, from the Amiga core and some of the Atari 7800 games. They have a very how to call this? They have some high pitch noise into it because there is no filter or something like this. There's no low pass filter that is actually reducing this oversampling, sampling, high pitch noise artifact, something like this. And sometimes it sounds a bit hurtful, to put it like this. So that really is something maybe could be added to the core, to the audio engine of the core. But yeah, that makes sometimes these little speakers a bit not so comfortable to use, to put it like this. But as I said, for most of the Game Boy games, Color, Advance, NES, those games that aren't making use of a lot of samples, and I mean the Amiga is a whole sample machine at all, so there is no sound generator, something like this, like we know from the C64, the SID, for example, and therefore it sometimes sounds a little bit not so good. Anyway, so what I was going to say is that I will create another version of this stand where this cable is actually looking to the other side. Could have come to my mind earlier, but anyway. And I will implement a 3.5 millimeter audio jack. Usually I have those thingies around. Every now and then there are some 90-degree angle adapters for this reason. Nope, can't find one if I need them. And I have ordered, or at least I will order, a 90-degree USB-C adapters as well. So I will create a new stand with those two adapters side by side with the correct placement, and then we can connect simply a USB-C standard cable to the back of this stand and the 3.5mm audio cable, and then we are able to use, it's going to be loud. Oh, it's okay. Yep. So and then we can use this 3D printed stand to charge it and to listen to music. So if you have some Amiga music discs, for example, then or the NES NSF player, then we can listen to music while charging the device, which is probably going to be a challenge for your charger. But anyway, okay, let's go to that whole updating core installation whatsoever procedure. So we need an USB-C connection, and I hope this is actually working right now. So there are actually two projects aiming at this, and I will show you the windows. Okay, I lost the window anyway. Why is that? Ah, here we go. Okay, so bit strange size, but anyway, probably going to work. So here we can see these are GitHub pages, and we have the so-called Pocket Updater, and we have the Pocket Updater utility. And they are actually doing basically the very same thing. You can simply put them on your SD card for your Analogue Pocket, and then you can run the tools from there. And I hope this one is actually going to start somewhere in the near future, not in the far future. So actually this one is some sort of a command line tool with some very simple text interface where you can go through and pressing yes and no for different options. It is small, it is lightweight, it is fast, and it's doing the job. But if you're a bit more into comfort range, then I recommend the Pocket Updater, which is actually a tool utilizing a Windows GUI, and you can go through this one, and I hope it is, it has started. Yep, okay. So I can show you this one. It should be visible. Nope, got lost. Then let's pick one. Pocket Updater. Okay, so and here we have different options. So, and the very first thing is actually to manage cores. I hope the window is going to be visible right now. No, it isn't. I was afraid of this. Is it a new window? Let me check. No, it isn't. Ah, that's indeed sad. So how can we do this? Let's add a screen capture. Just actually going to blow up that whole thing, I assume. Why isn't window capturing working? Display capture. Add existing. Okay, it's not too bad. Okay, that's fine. So, they are two separate windows, not linked to each other. Anyway, so I hope you can see this right now. And just a bit confused. Why? Ah, here we go. Working through my list of sources. Yeah, and here we have all the cores officially available for the Analogue Pocket. Officially means that these cores are how to put this. These are not officially supported by Analogue, so we have to distinguish this. But they are not behind a paywall. Put it like this. So there are some cores available for the Analogue Pocket that requires to join a Patreon, which is probably something I might do just to support the guy who's doing this. But as you can see, this list of cores is already exhaustive, and I may pick a couple of guys from here to support them. And actually it comes down to basically 4 people. So we talk about spiritualized, we talk about this Mesomas 312, and I'm talking about this AGG23, who did the NES core, for example, and the guy called Jutico, whatsoever, and he has some additional cores which are not available for free, but he did this Peng core, for example, which is something I really enjoy. Yep, and you simply go through the list and you just select the cores you want to have, and usually let me check. Nope. It recognizes the cores you have installed already. Here we can see the cores on my device as well. And here you can add your own categories to put them into, well, categories or folders, whatever we want to call this, and to keep them organized so that if you go for this extensive list of cores, then you're able to still find them. And yep, and then you just click Update Pocket, and it's checking whether there's a new firmware coming from Analogue, for example. And I lost my window. There we go. Looks a bit weird because I'm capturing the screen I'm looking at, therefore, well, yeah. So, and then it downloads all the cores, it downloads all the required ROM files, BIOS files, all that stuff, except for ROM files that are still in commercial conditions, like the Amiga ROMs, for example. So I bought, even if this a bit, well, disputable, I bought those Amiga ROMs from Cluando, from the Amiga Forever edition, because they are all the Kickstarter ROM files required for the different Amiga configurations. I'm actually using on the Turbo Chameleon 64 as well. And yeah, so, and this, everything is on your SD card. And I highly recommend adding the SD card to your system, not doing this over USB, because it takes quite a while to transfer all those files. The USB connection is transfer-wise not really fast. Maybe they're going to update this, or maybe there are some reasons, I have no idea. But taking the SD card out of the pocket, adding it to your system, doing this update is just a couple of minutes, and then everything is done. Yep, so much about this. And now let's jump back to something that looks a bit better. So we already lost all the windows again. So let's go back to the desk. And yeah, that's basically how to handle cores. And what else? I mean, that's actually all I had in mind. We're going to take this out of the stand again. It is actually refusing, so I have closed everything. Looks like. Yep. No. Okay. Yep, form factor wise, I think I talked about most of the stuff. The device itself, it is heavy. You really feel that there's a huge battery inside, and I guess that all the two FPGAs are adding something to the weight as well. It is built very robust, so you really can feel that there's some certain quality. If you talk about the Game Boy Advance, it is a bit quirky here and there, and I already have some concerns that the display hinge is surviving any longer, but there's indeed a very huge difference in build quality. So I'm not going to complain about original Game Boys, but this is indeed a different level. And I think depending on the size of your hands, it really fits very well, or maybe not so good. I have added the additional screen cover, which is probably not really required because it comes with some Gorilla Glass already. So it should be some sort of scratch resistant, but I was a bit afraid, so I ordered the original one, which I do not like that much because the original display is already a bit raised from the case, and this screen protector has some considerable thickness, which adds to this as well, and this makes this a bit not so elegant as I may expect this. And I'm having a hard time getting this onto this without any speckles. So we can see there are some dust points here and there, but it is much better than my first attempt. So this is actually the third attempt adding this one to here. But I may look for a standard thinner foil, something like this, a display screen protector, something like this. I have to check whether this dimension is already available somewhere, or if I may have to cut this by myself, so that I rather go and replace this more often than having one where I have to pay attention to it, that I do not scratch the screen protector. That sounds a bit weird to me anyway. And I really have to look whether I can find a nice soft case or something like this where I can place this into it, so that if I put this into my backpack together with all the other weird things inside, that I'm not going to scratch the case. It comes originally with a lot of protection, foil, adhesive, whatsoever we want to call this. So even here, the cartridge port is covered with some protection as well. And indeed, the screen was covered with this too, but this has peeled off quite quickly. And therefore, I added the additionally ordered one here too. Yep, we got power on off, and that's an interesting feature as well. I haven't mentioned this before. All the original functions, cores, whatever you want to call this, they support the so-called sleep mode. So you press this just shortly, and then the whole device goes into sleep, and then you can wake it up, and then you can continue gaming where you have left off. That's quite similar to the Game Boy Advanced, but here I had some troubles in the past, so sometimes games weren't waking up again, and it was still consuming some sort some certain amount of power during the sleep mode. But anyway, and then we got this volume buttons. That's probably a little complaint on my side. For me, they are quite small and a bit hard to distinguish. And I find myself often pressing both of them at the same time. And this is actually adding a mute function. And if I just want to make it louder or not so loud, then you really have to aim quite precisely to find them and add them to your own, let's say, preferences. Anyway, so the buttons and the cross are really nice. The original Game Boy cross and the original Game Boy buttons are a bit stiffer. So you really have a bit more resistance and they tilt a bit more than the analog ones. So it is subtle. It is not really a huge difference, but I found the original buttons and especially my tuned NES controller I'm using for playing NES Tetris or Nestris more precise and more predictable than this one. So I've tested this with Tetris indeed. And I'm having a hard time getting to the same, let's say, level or same score or whatever compared to the original Game Boys and the NES, because you have some, how to call this, some sort of slack, or it is a bit wobbly in my opinion. And especially for drop zone, I had to sort of develop a new playing technique. And this is actually when you collect your people from the ground, you have to go forth and back quite rapidly to make this as fast as possible. And usually I do this with my thumb. And on the original Game Boys, I keep pressing down. And I found that this isn't working as good as on the original Game Boys. But that might be just a personal issue. Controls overall are really good. They feel robust. They feel like they can last a couple of years of gaming. So it's not really a complaint. It is just mentioning the difference, to put it like this. And yeah, is it going to be my device for everyday usage? 80%. Why not? Or why not 100%? Well, first issue, the weight. It is, as I've mentioned, it is heavy. And for just put this in your pocket if you have to wait at a doctor's place, or if you charging your EV and it takes a while. Or you have to wait somewhere else for a train or on the bus, or you have just to, as some say, kill some time, then I think it is not the device to go for, because it is heavy, it is a bit bulky. I mean, I went for the SP version because it is very compact. Some may prefer this duck bone shape, like as Analog Game Boy Advanced, I'm sorry, more, and I understand this, but I like this more or less closer to the original format a bit more, and especially compared with the Game Boy Pocket. I think the Game Boy Pocket is the king of handheld form factor, whiteness, whatever we want to call this. And this is actually still my number one device for playing the standard Game Boy Tetris, for playing Castellian, nebulous. And I even played a lot of Drop Zone on it, but this pushes the limit, the limit of the display, or this pushes the display to its limit. Becomes a bit hard to see, and you need some bright light. But I think this is indeed unbeatable in terms of size and weight. But otherwise, I mean, talking about all those cores, talking about this incredible, amazing display, it is indeed a very fantastic device. Is it worth the money? Well, that's indeed hard to say, because I mean, it costs, right now it costs $219 plus shipping plus custom fees. So here in Europe, you end up easily somewhere in the range of 260, 270 euros, which is quite a lot of money for a handheld device. But we have to keep in mind, it is capable of even more systems than the Analogue NT Mini, the NES console from Analogue, which has cores as well, but just 8-bit cores. I'm absolutely fine with this. So 16-bit systems are really an exception in my personal interests, so to say. So the Neo Geo mentioned as one, and sometimes a bit of Amiga gaming, but although beside this, I do not spend that much time with 16-bit game systems. So for me, it's absolutely fine, and it has a couple of features screen-wise that is still outstanding. But if you put all this into consideration, I think the price for this device is okay. I mean, it's a hobby, and it is nothing you really need to survive. But if you are into Game Boy gaming, and if you want to enjoy this, and if you're getting older, and if you don't want to play Game Boy games with glasses, except you have already glasses or you need glasses all day long, then it's probably going to make a difference as well. But for me, it is really very nice to just grab it and play some games, and then I'm quite happy with the game states, with the save states, with screenshots and all that things. It makes it really a very round product to me. And as I've mentioned, I'm considering getting the dock as well, and see if this is going to sort of replace my Analogue NT Mini. I mean, it's going to be very tricky to stuff an NES cartridge or Famicom cartridge into this. So we talk about using ROM files and anyway, but I can keep the cartridges as collection maybe. So it could be the one and only device if you are not considering going for the Mister, which is price-wise at a different level, at a different higher level, so to say. But I think the Mister offers more possibilities in terms of game controllers. So for me, it's really about game controllers. If I want to use just a handful of controllers, which I don't like maybe, and if I'm not able to pick the one that really fits to me, because it is not supported by the Analogue Pocket, then this could be indeed a game changer. This could be a no-go, it could be a showstopper, whatever we want to call this. I went through this with the C64 Mini. It is very restrictive in terms of game controllers, and it is the number one reason why I'm very rarely use the C64 Mini, because I cannot use the controllers I want to use. And that's going to be the main point here. I really have to dig into this. I really have to check what sort of experience people have made already, and then I might decide against or not against it. Anyway, so I think the video is already long enough. I haven't planned to talk that much, but surprisingly, there are many things to talk about considering the device. And yep, so feel free to comment to the video, feel free to express yourself. What's your opinion? If you have any questions, something I haven't covered yet, I'm pretty sure I missed one important thing. And that's really something you have to go through. Tools. There are actually 3 different things. Nanoloop is something to make music. GB Studio is something where you can add GB Studio games or applications. And developer is actually just some additional features where we can, which we can disable or not. And something I want to show is I made a little, not game, but a little application with GB Studio. It is a strange approach to me, so I really have to spend some time understanding this. But I was at least able to add some sort of a player sprite. And if we go to a certain area, I have added a couple of text nodes. I got some problems with the screen refresh. Something like this isn't working quite well, but we can go through the different text files I have added here. And that's my thank you note for all of my supporters. And I hope you like it. And it's probably not the best example of what's possible with Game Boy, with the GB Studio, Game Boy Studio. But there are a lot of interesting examples. I really have to take some time going through this, checking this, what's possible, if it's really something I'm interested in. So what I've seen so far, it is heavily event driven. So it's not just some code you write down. It's really more a click and connect thingy, which I really struggle a bit with. So, but maybe it's actually something I can dive into it. But that sounds like the next rabbit hole I don't want to really go into. But anyway, so summing up that whole thing. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks a lot for to all of my supporters. Thanks a lot for supporting me. And as I said, feel free to leave some comments, some thoughts, some questions, whatsoever. And feel free to like and subscribe the video as usual here on YouTube. And that's all for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.